Well, we have an hour. That's going to be quite a lot of time and fun. So let's talk about some cool things, some cool ideas that are happening. The first statement I propose is anonymous transactions of base money. I think that's a super fascinating topic and one that has, enlightened the minds of cypherpunks for quite some time. Let's break it down. You know, what is anonymous? Anonymous comes from the Greek, without a name. Right? So an action that is not attributed to a certain name, right? Where we cannot then therefore link multiple actions to the same person. And that's the realm of anonymity, where we choose to not reveal much about ourselves. Right? And we don't choose to reveal the names that we have with the associated transactions. And so anonymity means that we can reduce the potential attacks that we might suffer. Because if nobody knows what you're doing or how much money you have or you spend it on, well, then nobody really can steal it from you. And that's a nice benefit. So this is why it's important for your property to be able to not share about how much you have and what you do with it. Then transactions, what are those? Transactions are about economic exchange, right? So two parties coming together consensually and agreeing that they're off better if they trade with the other party, right? Someone gives the pizza, and what does the other guy give? Well, probably some money, right? That's the most liquid medium of exchange that we have, where the merchants, basically any merchant in the economy is willing to give his precious goods for this particular good, the money. And so money is half of every transaction, right? Whenever you go to buy a good or a service, you offer your money in exchange. And the other party accepts it, well, because he's pretty sure that other merchants will accept that particular good. So his suppliers will want to get paid with that money. And then for every time you receive money, it means that somebody knows that you just got paid, right? At least the person who paid you the money. Right? He has to, well, probably know your name, or at least he knows that you're the guy behind this counter who's selling pizza. Right? And then also, later, when you spent that money, you are going to give it to your suppliers. Right? So now the supplier that provides you the raw materials to sell the pizza, he is going to want to get paid in money, and he will know that you had enough money to give it to him. Right? These are some of the minimum amounts of information that has to be revealed when we transact, when we purchase things with money. But it's not quite necessary for the whole world to know about this. Right? Other people don't care or don't need to know about the fact that I just purchased a pizza with some money. That would usually be true, right? Especially then when we're talking about the next aspect, which is base money. Right? So money is the most liquid medium of exchange, as we've established earlier. Right? But what is the base money in and of itself? Base money is money proper. It's the good as is, right? It's a chunk of physical gold in your hand. Right? You control it fully, and nobody can easily take it away from you. And there's no legal claim that you have here. It's the actual money. Another alternative is you take that gold coin and you give it to the goldsmith, who has a huge box that is out of solid metal and protected by a guy with a gun. And so he's very high security invested into protecting the things inside the vault, and you could put your money inside the vault and get back a paper certificate, right, saying that, hey, whoever has this paper, he can take one piece of gold back out of the vault. This paper itself, it's not base money. Right? It's a claim on base money. There's a big difference. Right? It's not the good in and of itself. It's a promise that you can redeem the good, the money, back at the future point in time. And so, of course, the paper in and of itself doesn't have much value, especially if the guy who owns the mint is running away with it. Right? So that means having access to base money is, again, extremely important. Why? Because it reduces the risk of theft. Right? If you have your money in a vault, in a money warehouse, the operator thereof can take it and run away. But if you hold the money yourself, that operator has no extra leverage to run away with your money than any other guy. And that's a big benefit of base money. It's something that only you control, that nobody else has a claim other than you. Right? Again, with base money, anonymity is quite important. Also for the fact, because once the base money is handed over, the other party has it now. Meaning there is no leftover claim or promise to pay money in the future. No, the debt has been distinguished, the trade is settled. Right? The base money has moved control and therefore the purchase is made. And no future relationship is required between the merchant and the customer after this point. Right? You pay and you go, that's it. So we don't need to have any reputation for the future for this specific trade to happen. Right? We've just paid and it's done. And that's how, well, physical gold worked all the time, and that's how physical cash nowadays works in the fiat world. And Bitcoin is equivalent to these two aspects in the sense that it is base money. It is not a claim on something else. If you have a UTXO on the Bitcoin blockchain, this is a unrefutable claim, right? That you can. It's an unrefutable asset that you can use and spend in a future Bitcoin transaction. However, Bitcoin is peculiar in some senses because it requires that that every user verifies the transactions of everyone else. Right? That's part of the Bitcoin system. It's a distributed network where every user, every operator of a Bitcoin full node needs to download and remember and process a huge amount of data, which is the transactions where that base money changed hands, presumably. And this means that there's a lot of cost associated with running a Bitcoin full node, with verifying the integrity of the actual money that you're holding. And Bitcoin is a system that is optimized for verification, in the sense that because we want to have many users, we need to have many people to verify every transaction of everyone else. And so we prioritize that we have certain types of transactions that are extremely easy to verify and very difficult or impossible to forge or tamper with. And Bitcoin achieves that beautifully, but still at quite a huge cost, even at the low rate of transactions that we're currently seeing. Right? And the more users join the system, the more users make transactions, the more everyone has to remember about everyone else. So this means that it's a system where we have to share a lot of information with basically everyone, right? We make a lot of knowledge public, the information of our transactions in the Bitcoin sense, which coins are being spent, the inputs to a transaction, and which coins are being created, the outputs to a transaction. So in order to use this base money, we have to reveal the intent of moving it to everyone, the entire world. And so the first part of this statement then becomes a bit difficult, because is it then still anonymous if you have to reveal every transaction to everyone in this entire world? Right? That seems to be difficult to still retain anonymity at this system. Well, there are numerous tricks that we can use to reduce the amount of information that we reveal about ourselves when we make transactions with the Bitcoin base money system. Right? One of the really obvious ways, one of the big fallacies or huge user problems that were created after the deployment of Bitcoin was the reuse of addresses. So an address is essentially a public key. The address basically defines who can spend the coin that we are creating here. Right? So an address first appears on the output side of a transaction, where that condition of who can spend this amount of money is first time mentioned in the Bitcoin blockchain. And at a later point in time, when someone wants to spend this coin that was created, he needs to prove that he has a valid solution, a valid witness to the lock of the address, so to say. And in most cases, that's just the signature of a private key. Right? So a transaction that spends the coin from this address is only valid if the transaction was signed by the private key that corresponds to the public key that corresponds to the address. So and now, if you want to receive Bitcoin multiple times, you could use the same public key, the same address all the time, because you still know the private key to it, and presumably nobody else does. But the big problem then is, to an outside observer, I see now not just one time an address getting paid and later paying money, but instead I see it multiple times happening frequently. Right? So I can attribute that multiple transactions that are at different times in the blockchain come from the same person. And this is what you can stop by not using the same address every time. You just generate a new private key, a new public key, and therefore a new address for each time you get paid. And all of a sudden, every time you receive money, you have a new name, a new identity. Right? And just when you receive money, that new identity is completely random to every time you received money in the past. It has never been seen before. It's a truly new name. And then, yeah, you can receive money frequently without anyone knowing that these addresses belong to the same person. The big trick comes, though, what if you want to spend your money now? Let's say you received 1, 2, and 3 Bitcoin in the past, and now you want to make a payment of 6 Bitcoin. Right? What do? You have to create a new transaction where you spend the 3 coins from fresh addresses that you received in the past, and you put them in a transaction, 3 coins on the input side, and on the output side you have 1 address, right? That's the 7 Bitcoin that you want to pay. Right? But now you've just revealed that there are 3 inputs from completely random addresses, but that now were mentioned at the same time and with the same, or like signing the same message, being in the same transaction, which is a high indication that they probably belong to the same guy. Right? So you've just revealed the common ownership of certain addresses and certain coins, not at the point where you received them, but at the point where you spent them. Right? And that's a big problem. So these are the things that we have to address. If we want to have a private money system, a private base money system. And, well, there were lots of different approaches to address this problem. Like, for example, changing the protocol completely, forking off and doing something radically new, like Zcash or Monero. But it seems that whenever we try to add more complex privacy solutions to the Bitcoin protocol, if we change the rules in any way, it seems that even though we might get some benefits, we get huge downsides, right? Especially in the terms of verification cost. To run a Monero full node or a Zcash node and to verify everything from scratch requires an extremely expensive computer and a huge internet connection, right? And in some conditions, you might not even be able to verify the blocks that are coming in fast enough, right? So before you've verified one block, the next one's already coming in. These are actual problems of these systems that mean that the cost of verification increases. Therefore, few users can use it as a base money. Right? Base money means you don't have to trust anyone else to hold that asset. Well, if you didn't verify the UTXO set and the blockchain of the coin that you're holding right now, then you cannot be sure that this is an actually legit coin that will be accepted by other people. Right? So if you want to use it as a base money, you need to verify it fully. And that means a high verification cost limits the amounts of users that could use this base money system. Plus, it creates a complete new shitcoin that nobody cares about. Right? And with Bitcoin already having a huge network effect and a massive amount of users, that just means that you are in the tiny minority, a small group of cypherpunks trying to hide, but your crowd is tiny and you're quite easy to identify. Right? So that's a problem. And instead, we can try to use the Bitcoin system as it's currently designed with the same inherent set of rules, just get a bit smarter about using it. And I would argue we can actually achieve fully anonymous transactions of the Bitcoin-based money system on the base layer blockchain, like right now. I think we have, for all intents and purposes, solved the problem. For now, it's just a question of polishing it up a little bit. So how do we do this? Right? How do we protect us from anyone else learning that multiple addresses belong to us, or multiple transactions that we've made at different times belong to us, to the same name? Right? How can we remove this information from getting out there? How can we make the system anonymous? The trick is, it's actually quite simple. Instead of making a transaction all by yourself, you get together with hundreds of other people, and you make a transaction with hundreds of inputs and hundreds of outputs, not alone, but together. Right? You hide in a crowd directly in a Bitcoin transaction. And that's the idea of a CoinJoin, basically. And the really cool thing about CoinJoin is it's still a base money system. You're never giving up control over your money. You're at no point in time at risk of someone stealing from you, because you can fully verify what's going on, right? So this means nobody can steal from you. And if that CoinJoin system is implemented well, then nobody can spy on you. Not a single person, right? Not the other people participating in the transaction, not the coordinator who's the guy who brings us all together, so to say, the platform for this group chat, right? Not even an outside observer, right? Nobody can track that multiple inputs belong to you or multiple outputs belong to you in a single transaction, right? And that is important, right? Because now we have held up the qualities of a base money system, that nobody can steal from you, right? And that nobody can spy on you, right? That's what gold, that's what physical fiat cash enables you as bearer instrument base money systems. Well, Bitcoin is very different because we're in cyberspace, but now at least we've regained the attributes of anonymity, right? Of being able to use the system without revealing our true name and without tying the same name to multiple transactions. And that means we can receive money anonymously and we can spend money anonymously. And again, this is here right now. And the great thing is that this was a vision of the cypherpunks from decades ago. Like the first, let's say, cypherpunk project out there was in 1983, Chaumian blind signatures, right? which enabled the idea of an anonymous money system, right? To have anonymous transactions in cyberspace. The big problem of eCash is it's not base money. It's a claim on base money. You give your dollars or your gold to someone else, and he returns you a tiny electronic signature, a couple bits and bytes. Right? Those bits and bytes aren't the base money. Right? And the guy who runs the mint can take off with your physical money or your gold. Right? So that's a big problem. But with CoinJoins, while funnily using the same technologies of envisioned back then, Chaumian blind signatures, not as money substitutes, but as access rights, anonymous access rights to this chat group of us together preparing the same Bitcoin transaction. And so we use the same idea from the basic origins of the cypherpunk movement, and we apply it in a bit of a different way to create something that enables us to have anonymous transactions of base money. And that's a pretty, well, I guess, bold claim to a long journey of people trying to fix this problem, and it is a bloody difficult problem. And I'm not claiming that we're doing it perfectly at the moment, but I think we're on track to doing it really, really well. Especially with the work that we've been doing on Wasabi 2.0, where we basically create huge CoinJoins, at least 150 inputs, around 300, 400 inputs for every transaction. And now transactions every 20, 30 minutes or so. Right? So this is shaping up to be a actually used way of making anonymous transactions, where right now it's very difficult for most cases. I guess if you are under 100 Bitcoin or so, you should gain a substantial amount of privacy within a couple hours or days for your money. It gets a bit tricky when we're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of Bitcoin. Why? Because there's no crowd available yet. Right? There's not that much users, not that much liquidity where you could hide in. Right? Being a whale is difficult. And the major concern that we currently still have is the cost of it. Because making anonymous base money transactions should be not just effortless and fast, but also efficient and cheap. Right? And in the sense of Bitcoin, that means we need to be block space efficient. With how do we register the inputs and which outputs do we register, etc. That's a very broad possible space where we could design specific transaction networks now. There's a lot of flexibility that the Wabi-Sabi CoinJoin protocol enables us to do. And currently, well, we could certainly be more block space efficient. So that means getting smarter about which inputs to register when, and which outputs, meaning how many outputs would you register in this round, and what's the value of it, etc. This basically opens up, again, somewhat of a already discussed problem of like switch networks and transaction network topology, where we can use old ideas from the cypherpunks to now apply them on how your client, your Bitcoin wallet, chooses what's the privacy level of my coins, and which should I spend, and which new coins should I create, etc. So we have a long way ahead still of making the system better, but it's a lot of fun building it, and the progress we have is really nice. So I've been blabbering for a while. I'm going to take a drink. Questions, please. Any topics, insights?
The cost. Can you? How much does it cost to run it?
So there are two fees associated to a CoinJoin transaction. One is, let's start with the easier one. There you have to pay the coordinator a fee, potentially. So what is a coordinator? The coordinator is, think of it of a bulletin board in cyberspace, right? Like a public message forum where anyone can write messages, so to say. But it's a single server, right? It's like Facebook, right? A single server that hosts your messages, so to say. And in order to use that service, he might or might not charge a fee for you. Right? And currently with the CK Snacks coordinator, that is the Wasabi wallet default coordinator, we charge a 0.3% fee for the Bitcoin amount that is registered on the input side of the CoinJoin. Right? But only if it's a fresh coin, so to say. Right? So if you're a recurring user, instead of just making one CoinJoin transaction, you make 2 or 3 or 4, you don't have to pay that fee, that coordinator fee for the second, third, and fourth round. Right? Only when you receive a new coin, right, into your wallet, and you register that new coin to the CoinJoin, right, then you're going to have to pay the coordinator fee again. Because even the coordinator, again, cannot know that these two coins belong to the same person. Right? So not even that coordinator knows that you're the same guy who registered multiple times within the span of a couple days. Right? So that's why the fee is charged only when a fresh coin comes in, but not if the coin comes from a CoinJoin in the past. Or even if the guy who paid you was a Wasabi user. Right? So if someone else was using Wasabi, making CoinJoins, he sends you a transaction paying you, and now you take that coin, go back to the same coordinator, and say, I want to CoinJoin this coin. No fee will be applied either. The idea is friends don't let friends pay for privacy. Right? So if you pay people from Wasabi, they won't have to pay the mining fee. The coordinator fee anymore. What still exists, though, is the mining fee. That's the other big aspect. And the more important one. Because, well, as we've seen recently, Bitcoin mining fees can be quite expensive. And they will get more expensive in the future. So that's where it can be very cheap. It can be extremely expensive. It depends on how smart your client is and what exactly you configure him to do it, right? Because so there's a problem, right? Do you want to have a lot of privacy, like very fast and super cheaply? Well, you know, that's not going to work out that well. You're going to have to make some trade-offs. If you want to have a lot of privacy, you're going to have to pay more, and it's going to cost you more time. Right? If you want to do it really quick, you can do it, and it's probably not even going to cost that much, but you're not going to get a substantial amount of privacy. There's not a large crowd that you would be hiding in. So it depends. The really cool thing, though, is now we can, all this complexity of which inputs and which outputs do you want to register is no longer with the coordinator, as with any other CoinJoin protocol in the past. With Wasabi 2.0, everything is client-side. The coordinator is extremely stupid. The client is very smart. So that means that you can either write a client or use one that exists that configures the purchase of block space according to how you like it. Right? Do you want to not buy any block space or register any coins when the fee rate is super high, for example? Or do you only want to do it but less? You know, you can do less CoinJoins, register less inputs, less outputs, etc. That's going to be cheaper. So I still didn't answer your question of how much does the mining fee cost, but basically, if you want to be super cheap, what you could do, like you receive a coin from Kraken, let's say, and now you register that on the input side of the coin join, but you do that only because you want to pay the merchant, who expects whatever, 0.1 Bitcoin on this address. So you add the merchant's payment address directly to that first coin join where you register your fresh inputs. So you can make the payment in a coin join with the first fresh coin. And then let's say you only take yourself one change output. So you literally have the cost of one input and two outputs. That's as cheap of a mining cost as any regular user transaction is going to be. In fact, it's even a tiny bit smaller because there's the transaction header, which is kind of the title of the transaction. Instead of you having, in a single user transaction, you have to pay for the entire transaction header because there's only one user, and so he has to pay for everything. In a coin join, however, there's hundreds of users. And so each only pays a small fraction of the transaction header. So in this extreme case, making the payment in the coin join is in fact cheaper, a tiny amount, than doing it by yourself, only for the mining fees. There is the coordinator fee to consider. But you also get quite little privacy. You're making a transaction where, so like the merchant knows that you just paid him, and he probably knows your identity too, and now he can look in the same transaction and he sees like 300 inputs, but I don't know, maybe 10 of them are coins that don't come from coin joins in the past. And he could be guessing, well, maybe that's your first round. Then all of a sudden there's only 10 people that it might actually be, 10 inputs that might be it, that made this payment. So he has to do a lot of work to find out which input might possibly be yours. Maybe in the future that can be optimized, but right now it isn't really. So you get a tiny or a decent amount of privacy, at least for the time, but you didn't pay anything extra other than the coordinator fee. Now, if you're paranoid, another problem with that naive, very tiny CoinJoin example, or tiny user footprint example, on the output side, you have two outputs. One is the value that the merchant demanded, 0.1 Bitcoin in our example, and the other is your change output. And your change output is the value of the inputs minus the payment amount that you're sending, minus the fees, and that's your change output. But it's a very unique value. Meaning you're very likely to be the only one who creates an output of that value in this CoinJoin transaction. And that's not great. A lot of people, when using this CoinJoin system, somehow find to create the same values, outputs for the CoinJoins, like 0.1 Bitcoin, 0.2, 0.4, 0.8, etc. There are some denominations that are frequently chosen by users of this CoinJoin system. And you're not one of them. With that payment output, because it's an arbitrary value. So that's not great. And then on top of that, you have a change output that is again an arbitrary value, that is unique to you, so to say, and there's not going to be a second coin with the same value that you can hide in. And that's not great on a privacy point either. So what you could do instead to improve your privacy in this case, which comes at additional purchase of block space, is, for example, to not just create one change output to yourself of an arbitrary amount, but to break up the value of this coin into 3 or 4 outputs, let's say, that are each of the standard denomination that everyone else is very likely to choose as well. So you're going to get an output value back to your own address that is of a standard amount that's even more private than a non-standard amount output in this huge coin join, right? Because it's very likely that other people chose this output number as well. But it comes off the cost of, instead of one output, or I guess 2 outputs, you have to buy 6, 7, and so that's more expensive. But you get a lot more privacy. And another way that you can make it more expensive but get more privacy and also take a lot more time, don't register the fresh coin that you just received from the exchange. First, register the non-private coin and make a transaction where you spend to yourself. So all of the outputs belong to you, and you don't pay anyone in this coin join, you just pay yourself. So you spend 1 coin, you create 4 coins, and then in the next transaction, you take one of these 4 coins that you just spent, and you register it in the second round, where you make the payment to the pizza merchant, and break down your change into multiple. Right? So now you're not just doing one round, you're doing multiple rounds, which means that the last round where from which you pay the merchant, he now has to look not just at the fresh coins that came in, but all of the coins that were here, including the remixes, and there might be hundreds of previous CoinJoin transactions that are linked on the input side of this CoinJoin. So instead of having to look at just one transaction of 300 inputs, 300 outputs, he has to look at like 100, with each 300 inputs, 300 outputs. So it becomes this huge network of transactions that you could have potentially made, but it's no longer clear which one it actually is. So doing multiple rounds of CoinJoin before you do a payment is a substantial increase in your privacy and in the size of the crowd that you're hiding in. It comes at the cost of you need to buy, let's say, one input here, 4 outputs there, another input here, another 5 outputs here. Right? So that's a lot more than just 1 in and 2 out. Yeah, so that's the cost aspect. The coordinator cost is configurable by the coordinator, and there are multiple coordinators running, and some for free, including one here actually in Bordel was running a 1.0 version of Wasabi. I do think they charged a fee though. They have to finance the party down there anyhow. And then the mining fee is very customizable to the client. You can either purchase a little little block space or a lot of block space, and you can do it at times where the fee rates are low or where the fee rates are high. So how much does it cost on mining fees? I don't know.
Okay, next question right here.
Hey, Max. So block space is a limited resource, as you know, and you keep talking about buying some of that space. You know, that's an important aspect of all of this. One of the reasons people seem to like non-base money basically is the not using of block space, essentially the scalability aspect. Yeah. So I'd just kind of like to, no specific question, I'd just kind of like to hear you talk about scalability and how that relates and what you think of block space as a limited resource.
Yeah, there are two scarce things in Bitcoin. The number of sats in the UTXOs and the number of block space that we can all write to and verify or read from. Yes, inherently limited. And when something's limited, there's going to be a cost. Right? The cost we're interested in here is not the cost for a sat, which, by the way, is the inverse of the price of everything, but we're interested in the cost for the block space. Right? Yes, using Bitcoin-based money has not always, but almost always been expensive or costly, at least. In the early days, you could get away with zero-fee transactions, but pretty soon that stopped because we charged a fee as a spam attack or denial of service problem, basically. And so, yes, and that means custodians, by definition, or in most cases, do less base layer transaction than the transactions of the money substitutes that you pass around with. Right? So, you deposit gold once, and you get your paper, and then you make 100 payments where you pass on the paper, etc. And like at the end of a month, one of these guys will come back and batch all of the paper tokens that he received and get his real gold out. So like 2 base layer transactions, so to say, and a bunch of custodial money substitutes, and that is a lot cheaper. In the first case, paper is physically lighter than gold. Like good luck moving a ton of gold, and that's not even that much value, So paper, one tiny slip that has just many zeros. The fiat printers are very good at adding zeros, very efficient, and so that means it's quite cheaper to transact larger amounts more frequently. We also see that in Bitcoin, right? Since the very beginning, we've had money warehouses. Well, almost since the very beginning, and usually they were in form of merchants. Merchants acted as money warehouses, specifically shitcoin merchants. People who bought and sold fiat for Bitcoin exchanges, right? These merchants were offering banking services for their customers, Bitcoin banking services, to reduce the friction, so the effortlessness was much more effortless, much easier to use. It was much faster, right? And it cost less to be a bank on top of being the service provider of being an exchange. And one of the big downsides, these early Bitcoin banks or money warehouses had shit cryptography, like nothing basically, other than basic authentication, but no blinding, no encryption, no hiding of identities, no hiding of transaction patterns or of the amount of money that was held. Right? So the bank can completely spy on its users. He knows when you received, how much, from whom, and how much you have in total, and where you spend it on. Right? Every time you send and receive money. So the anonymity was lacking. Even though, funnily, like anonymity, an anonymous bank was one of the first achievements of the cypherpunks. That's David John, 1983, and DigiCash, 1995 or something like this. Right? So this was out in production running, an anonymous bank for money that issued money substitutes. And now we can do it with blind signatures, and we can do it in Bitcoin. Right? And what we finally see now is a flourishing of anonymous money warehouse systems in the recent couple of years, both heavily influenced by this project. So the first is Cashew, which is a Chaumian blind signature-based eCash money warehouse system with Bitcoin as the base money payout system. It's super fast, it's super cheap, I mean it's free, like 0 fees for I think most mints. Again, the mint can configure a fee if they want to, but they're just running a tiny piece of software, so the marginal cost of providing the service is near 0, the cost of like a tiny phone and internet connection. So that's cool. The big problem though is it's still just one guy who can rug you and steal from you. He can no longer spy on you, that's cool, but he can steal from you. And then comes Fedimint, which is a offshoot or a child of the Scrit, which was announced here 4 or 5 years ago or something by a project by Smuggler and Frank Brown, who were the first to think of a federated money warehouse system that used Bitcoin and Bitcoin multi-signature as a federated control of base money, which in and of itself is fucking mind-blowing. And on top of that, they figured a multi-signature eCash scheme. Right? So instead of the client verifying one signature from the mint, the signature is the eCash token, the client knew that there are 5 mints, and the token is only valid if 3 signatures of them are signed. Right? So a token is 3 out of 5 signatures instead of 1 out of 1 signature. It's the same trick that Bitcoin used to establish multi-signature on the Bitcoin base layer. Right? You put 3 public keys or 5 public keys, and you say a transaction is only valid if it's signed by 3 of these private keys. That's the hacky way to do multi-signature that Satoshi and then Smuggler and Frank figured out how to do. What Eric then later discovered, to all of our mind blow, is that we can have something like music that is, so Bitcoin recently switched to Schnorr signatures, which enable you to have 3 or 5 internal private keys and public keys, but you can aggregate them to a single public key, right, an aggregated public key that you can put on the blockchain. But the thing is, you can only produce a signature for this public key if 3 out of the 5 of these private keys have signed that message. So it's kind of like a hidden multi-signature, right? Or what's known as then music or threshold signature scheme. So it looks like a single public key and a single signature, but in fact there are multiple internal private keys and multiple internal signatures that were needed. But the verifier doesn't know about that. That's a huge verification improvement. That's why we use it on Bitcoin now. Instead of needing to download and remember and process 5 public keys and 3 signatures, I just see 1. That's much cheaper. And then also it's huge more privacy, because now you can represent arbitrary threshold signatures or control schemes in a single compact signature, and you look indistinguishable from everyone, like the most of us who just use single sig. Right? That's pretty cool. And so what Eric Elsirian figured out, how can we have blind signatures that are actual threshold cryptography? Right? So we have 5 public keys of the mint and 5 private keys of the mints, right? But they aggregate together to being just one signature. and one aggregated public key, so to say. And this threshold blind signature things, Eric picked it up in some obscure Japanese research paper, and finally implemented it now with Fediment. So this is a way where we have federated control of our base money in a vault controlled by multiple experts, so to say, or service providers. And simultaneously, we have an instant, anonymous, and free way of transferring the access rights to that base money, those money substitutes. We can transfer them extremely fast, for free, to anyone, perfectly anonymously. Meaning we have now anonymous, like custodial transactions, and that's great. Hopefully more custodians start using them. Because again, it's way cheaper than using Bitcoin on-chain. Custodians have always existed, will always exist. We won't be getting around of it because it's a massive reduction in cost. Right? And that's a good thing. Right? We're way more efficient with the rare resource of block space if we aggregate a lot of economic activity in a very tight amount of block space. So it's economically beneficial to have custodians, and people will want to use them because it's cheap. And so they will, and we'll have to deal with it. We'll just have to make sure that it's anonymous.
Okay, next question.
Yeah, hi Max, thanks for the talk. I'm not highly technical, but is it going to get to a point where all of this is integrated into either layer 1 and layer 2, so it's all done automatically and so you don't have to be conscious of actually using a service? And if it gets to that point, at what point can you actually start to starve the nation state of tax because they cannot track any of these transactions, and is that at all realistic?
So to the first point of when will we see this, let's say by default, quote unquote, in the protocol? And that's difficult because people interact differently with the protocol. Right? A small minority, unfortunately, runs it the proper way by running their own full node. That's most likely going to be Bitcoin Core. It could be something like Bitcoin Knots, Bitcoin D, LeBitcoin, but most likely Bitcoin Core. And so will Bitcoin Core in the near future or ever add a CoinJoin support? I wonder. I think it's definitely in the interest of the Bitcoin Core developers. It's a very privacy-focused bunch, and they're doing an insane amount of work there. However, Bitcoin Core as a software project likes to work on decentralized and resilient technology. Yeah, so far, I don't think we've seen a CoinJoin implementation that is to the quality standards or to the design standards of Bitcoin Core. Like it's just an extremely sophisticated project to contribute to, and for the nature of Bitcoin Core as quote unquote the default Bitcoin full node implementation, I don't think it's the right place to put it there. And on top of that, the Bitcoin Core wallet, even though it's very frequently used, is somewhat stale currently because it's in the same repository under the same maintenance rules as the consensus code. Right? So if you want to add a button in the UI, all of a sudden you need to have the crazy wizards who also review consensus code look at your code to make sure it doesn't break anything. And so the cost of writing successful code to Bitcoin Core is just super high. There's some efforts to move the wallet, kind of make it more of a module, a bit more unrelated to the Bitcoin full node consensus part. But that's a huge project that will take decades probably to finalize. So that's going to be difficult. However, to that other part of the question, Bitcoin Core is not the only or even the biggest way of how people use the protocol, right? Most run light clients that aren't actually the full node. And these people are here. The cool thing about Wasabi 2.0 or the Wabi-Sabi protocol, well, it's both a good thing and the bad thing. All of the complexity is client side, right? Which means there's a lot of freedom in the client side of how you want to implement this. Right? Like in our example, do you want to register one input, two outputs in a single round, right? Or do you want to make this huge ceremony, time staggered across days of multiple amounts and whatnot? If you want to open lightning channels, etc., you can do that right now, right? In a Wasabi 2.0 or Wabi-Sabi CoinJoin, basically. It just needs to be developed, right? That's a big problem. And so far, Wasabi was definitely the forerunner in building this stack. But other people are using it as well, right? So for example, BTC Pay Server has now integrated in a plugin the Wabi-Sabi CoinJoin cryptography and logic. So that means that merchants using BTC Pay can receive money and CoinJoin it and even make batched payments, which is extremely fee efficient, right? To make not 10 transactions for 10 payments, but make one transaction for 10 payments. It's extremely fee efficient. And that's now possible there to do in a CoinJoin. Or Trezor Suite a couple months ago released their integration into Trezor Suite. And so Trezor Suite is the companion application that you can use on your desktop together with your offline signing device, that's the Trezor. And the gigantic achievement that they made is that you can now sign a multi-party Bitcoin transaction on an offline signing device. Right? Usually, offline signing devices only work if you control all of the inputs to that transaction. And if other people have other inputs, there are some security holds that need to be considered. And so Trezor, after like a shit ton of work, made it possible to securely, and without the possibility of losing your funds, sign a transaction where you don't have all of the inputs. Right? Which means Trezor is now the first one to enable anonymous transactions of base money in an offline signing device, right? Which is pretty great. So the cool thing is that because this is a very open API, with only 3 or 4 important API calls, that a lot of people will write new clients, so meaning new wallets that are just designed with the Wabi-Sabi CoinJoin protocol in mind, like Wasabi 2.0. Right? That's from the ground up designed, and that enables you to do a lot of things by default. Right? So in Wasabi, you receive money without any clicks. It will get registered for a CoinJoin, and you will to yourself, and you will, after a while of the wallet being open, it will just have spend your non-private coins and created new private coins. So the next time that you open the wallet to make a payment, you don't have to worry about your privacy. You just make the payment, and so it works by default. That you can do if you really design the whole system around this CoinJoin idea, or not, right? Like for example, in Trezor Suite, how they integrated it is that you still have all of your classical infrastructure for legacy addresses and everything else that the Trezor Suite does. But then they had to move to a new account derivation path, a new UI interface, right, that is just Taproot. By the way, hardware wallet CoinJoins only work for Taproot inputs. Right? So your wallet must have only Taproot inputs, otherwise it's not secure. So that means if you want to use this, you have to transfer money from your old account to the new private account, and then start the CoinJoin system. So there's much more friction involved, unfortunately, right? That's also just because Trezor, with the offline signing device, it's just a different OS. It has a lot of really challenging, interesting problems. Or like BTC Pay, for example, like they added the payment batching already. Like that's a huge fee savings and privacy and UX improvement and cost improvement. So that's really nice. Or now even Cooks is working on ways that instead of running the coordinator behind a web server with a REST API, you can now run it without a server just by being a Nostr client. Nostr, another really cool Bitcoin-like protocol for secure, resilient, and potentially anonymous communications. Here you can, so this means the coordinator no longer has to have a public web server, right, with a public IP address or a Tor onion service. The backend basically is now just a guy with a full node who has this magic key and who has a little bit of disk space that he can offer. Right? And the way that he talks to his customers is via the Nostr network. So some other guys relay, like some other guy runs servers or relays that store the messages of his clients and the responses of the backend to that client. And so running a coordinator is becoming lighter and lighter. BTCPay enables it in a click. There's now also ways to discover new coordinators. Cook's made a new Nostr event kind that is a specific announcement of a wabi-sabi CoinJoin coordinator that includes things like where am I reachable, like what's my IP address or my onion address, or my Nostr pub key, right? What's my fee rate, what's the minimum amounts, etc., like all the configuration that you might need, what's my public key. So that can now be discovered just by browsing a couple Nostr relays. You see all of the coordinators that are available. And your client can be very dumb and just connect to all of them randomly. That's probably a bad idea. Or your client can be smart, as it should be, and somehow find out the scoring of what's the quality of this coordinator, how long has it been running, what's its liquidity, how many users does it have, right? All of these things are thankfully publicly verifiable on the Bitcoin blockchain. So there's a lot of potential to review and verify other coordinators, and then connect to them all the time, occasionally. Yeah, so that's that.
Okay. We still got another
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Or a bit more.
Closing statement, or should I continue asking?
No, I guess we have a couple more questions.
All right. Anybody else?
Hey Max, considering the ever-rising fees, I suppose in maybe like 10 years' time, it might be too prohibitive to use CoinJoin for regular folks. And do you see Lightning when the receiver's privacy is enhanced? The sender already has pretty good privacy. Do you see Lightning basically taking over and being the anonymous private layer?
Lightning Network is a second layer of the blockchain that still represents base money, in my opinion. Lightning is not a custodial system. It's not. It's still Bitcoin. It's still base money proper. However, ownership or control over it is passed on off-chain, out of consensus, out of band of the regular Bitcoin users, but only shared between the two parties of the payment channel, or then the other parties of the payment channels through which you route your payments. So there's lots of privacy concerns with Lightning. They're pretty obvious and can be fixed. So lightningprivacy.com is the result of a research club we did there on improving the privacy of it. So pretty obvious stuff, but can totally be improved. It's all right. However, so the thing is, even with Lightning, you need base layer transactions to open and close the channel, hopefully cooperatively, or maybe uncooperatively, so meaning just by yourself, which will take more time and cost more money. That means, and your other premise was fees are high, therefore nobody's going to use CoinJoin. Right? Well, why are fees high? Because a lot of users want to make base layer transactions in Bitcoin. Right? So there's a huge demand for people who want to make base money transactions. Now, if they want to have privacy as well, which is kind of an assumption, right? But it means that if they want privacy, they can get privacy at very little additional cost. Right? If you just register one input to output to the CoinJoin, you get a decent amount of privacy, as we established earlier. It's not much, but it's decent. But you got it for basically free. Right? So there will still be CoinJoins done when fees are high, because fees are high, which signals people are willing to pay a high amount of fees. And I would argue we can assume that anonymity is valued, and because it is. And so if you can have an anonymous system that is not much more expensive than using the system otherwise, why not use it, even if the fee rate is high? Right?
So can I like further that, deepen that question? in relationship to now BRC20 and SRC20 tokens and how that's driving up fee. Could coin joins with tokens be a way to increase the anonymity set and reduce or increase costs? How do you see coin joins in that field that we're seeing develop now for competition for blank space pricing?
Yeah, those BRC20 tokens are, quite stupid. Like, I mean, in the design, you know, like it's all on the blockchain, and ordinals, ordinals are a way to trace control or ownership of UTXOs, basically. So you're inherently trying to have a non-fungible system where the reviewer can follow the ownership of the token, and like a public verifier can do that. Anyone, right? Even if you're not involved in that contract, like for example, I know you have equity stakes in your company. Like not just you know about that, everyone does, right? Plus there's just with some forms of doing these contracts, you do it on the output side, so coins become unspendable. Right, so we create UTXOs, very memory efficient, expensive, and that's why OpReturn is there, but that wasn't used. So it's a very expensive system. If you really want to do tokens, I don't think you need a blockchain for this.
Okay,
but
people
like, for
are
example,
going to do it on blockchain.
I know, right? And so we have to try to give them a system that is efficient, right? And that is secure and that is anonymous. Inscriptions isn't it, right? This whole BRC20 stuff is none of these three things. If you want to have speed, efficiency, cost, and privacy, then go with something like RGB. Right? That's a system that does the same thing for all intents and purposes, but it's client-side validated state and logic, meaning that the outside public doesn't know about your token transactions. Right? They don't even know it exists. But only the people who you are transacting with, the people who you sent the token to, the people you accept as shareholders in your company or whatever, right? Those people can verify what's going on, but outside observers can't. Right? And they can't because they don't know about it, and they don't know about it because it's client-side, meaning very, very little block space has to be consumed in order to settle millions of RGB state transfers. Right? Like one Lightning channel update can be each RGB token transfer, and you can batch millions of Lightning channel updates before you close the channel. And so this has the potential to do a lot of what we want to do, but efficiently and privately and faster. Right? It's a bit more difficult than, I guess, but I don't know.
Okay, so that's BRC and SRC. So the stamps protocol is as a counterpart to how people are doing tokens now on Bitcoin. How do you see that side of it?
Oh yeah, and
in terms of the efficiency and the trade-offs.
Yeah, so I guess your question was also, does this work with coin joins? And no,
where do you see the potentials for winning efficiencies, and where do you see the competition for that in block space pricing?
Well, so like my own personal goal is basically that make it possible that you can use coin-join systems to get a minimum amount of privacy with zero additional block space cost, right? Or even a slight savings in block space cost. If we figure out how to do that, and I think we have, at least in theory, it's not yet shipped, right? But that's nice. And then that means, you know, money is the most liquid medium of exchange, and monies often have another use case associated to it, right? Gold can be used for jewelry, for teeth, etc. People often say that that's a good thing because it backs the value of the money. That's nonsense, because the value of money is infinitely more important than some jewelry. And so the value of the jewelry is a tiny subset of the value of the money. So in fact, like jewelers are just hindered by having very expensive material to work with. So they don't, right? That's why you don't see much gold jewelry, because it's expensive. People prefer not to use the gold in other use cases. They prefer to use it for its moneyness. And I think the same will happen for Bitcoin block space. I mean, block space isn't the money, but it's the medium on which we convey the money, the base money. Right? So that means that there is, to some extent, some money, not moneyness, but the cost of block space is tightly related to the moneyness of Bitcoin, of sats. And so the value of hard base money that cannot be stolen, cannot be inflated, is infinitely more than stocks or NFTs or whatever you might want to use this for, in most cases. Right? And so that means that in the long run, people who make base money transactions are going to be willing to pay a higher fee rate than people who want to store JPEGs on the blockchain, right? Because that's pretty nonsense, to be honest. So therefore, in the long run, base money use cases are, I assume, not an economical statement, just my assumption that I assume it's going to be more valuable, and therefore those transactions that we see on the blockchain are going to be those that have the highest need for base moneyness, let's say, and I doubt that that's going to be any NFTs or even company stocks. Especially because for company stocks and NFTs, there's an infinite number of ways that you could implement this. Like my SQL database works great, you know, so there's many other ways that you could do that. There is no other way to do base money in cyberspace than Bitcoin. This is the only fucking way, right? So there is no escape valve where you could use a secure base money system, or where you could satisfy the same level of base moneyness as Bitcoin enables you in cyberspace. Right? So there's no alternative to go to. But for your JPEGs, like many different ways that you could do it. So that's why I think that in the long run, it's not really going to be an issue. The only issue that I see, let's get as efficient as fucking possible with making anonymous base money transactions. If that's efficient, we win. Right? If it's super expensive, then nobody's going to use it. Right? Because if you have to pay 100 times more to make your base money transfer, like if you want to do it anonymously compared to not doing it anonymously, that's not worth it for most people. Right? So most people will not be using anonymous systems if they're crazy expensive. Then who is left using the anonymous systems? Those who are willing to sacrifice a shit ton. Right? And most likely that's just going to be the criminals, so to say, people who have stolen a bunch of money that might lose it. Right? It's nice to have a crowd that's large and diverse with just regular Joes. It just makes sense. It's a bigger crowd. Right? So if it's efficient, people will use it. And then we have even more privacy. So it's to some extent a virtual cycle.
Cool. So we're over past the top of the hour now. Had it done a full hour. Thank you so much, Max, for joining us here today for this conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for the questions.